Views and opinions expressed within the following program are solely those of the individual. These views and opinions do not necessarily represent those of Shaw TV.
Hey Calgary, I'm Kevin Chorney. It's February 13th, and this is Calgary Now. Whether you have a dog, cat, chicken, penguin, or a horse, whatever the case, most Canadians consider their pets to be members of the family. The time, money, and level of care required to properly look after an animal is a major responsibility that's not to be taken lightly. Unfortunately, there are those who shirk the accepted level of care and neglect, abuse, and even kill animals whether they own them or not. Canada's animal cruelty laws have been in place for over a century, but have only recently beefed up penalties. However, for many, the problem lies with the wording of the laws and the loopholes it creates. Most offenders are given a slap on the wrist with little or no jail time and minimal fines and restrictions that might not be enforced if they leave the province. Canadians are emotionally charged and are calling upon the federal government to make a significant change to prosecute the worst animal cruelty offenders. Like many of you, I'm totally an animal lover. Pets enrich our lives, bring us joy, keep us active, and build strong emotional bonds. They're innocent, usually defenseless, and they just want to be our pals. That's why it's enraging to learn that there still exists an element of human garbage that torture, abuse, and act with nothing but cruel intent towards creatures that frankly just want to be loved. You have to ask why this abuse continues to happen and if we're doing enough to dissuade potential abusers from acting in the first place. I'm sitting down with a great panel of guests to discuss this in just a moment. You can get involved tonight. Throw us your 2 cents on Twitter at Calgary Now Show. To get the ball rolling, let's check in with the Ram Pack.
I think animals should be respected. Like, you shouldn't walk up and kick a dog or whatever. But I think when atrocities or crimes does happen to an animal, we have to take a measured approach because it's usually the cute animals that get precedence over everything else. I think that the animals that die at the zoo, at the stampede, should also have the same amount of rights. And it should be a measured approach because at the end of the day, they are still animals.
Thanks for joining us tonight. We are pleased to welcome Professor Kathleen Ruxtel from the University of Calgary and Brad Nichols from the Calgary Humane Society. Kathleen, briefly, thanks. Well, first off, guys, thanks very much for being here. Kathleen, if you would, tell us briefly about your work with the UC, if you would.
Yeah, so I'm an associate professor there. I study behavior, mainly in wildlife, actually. So I'm not a specialist on domestic animals, but I certainly can speak to any type of behavior that animals would have, yeah.
Awesome. Well, again, thanks for being here.
You're welcome.
And Brad, from the Calgary Humane Society, I imagine you're a busy guy. Tell us about what it is you do there.
Especially lately.
Yeah.
I'm the manager of cruelty investigations for the Calgary Humane Society, and so there's a team of 4 of us that do all the investigations for cruelty, neglect, abandonment, those sorts of things. So it keeps us fairly busy.
Yeah, unfortunately.
Yes.
Yeah, that's true. Well, let's get right into it. Again, thanks for being here. Now, the Calgary Humane Society received nearly 1,500 calls last year. Ended up laying only 21 charges in those calls. Now, to me, it seems like a bit of a maybe defunct law currently. It seems like the effectiveness of that law is maybe not, well, effective whatsoever. What is it that needs to change?
I think you have to consider the method of enforcement along with the laws themselves. We have a mandate to enforce the Animal Protection Act, and in doing that, the majority of what we do is education and compliance. So in 90 to 95 of those cases, all that's required of us, or of the situation, is when we go to the house and talk to the owner about whatever the issue is. Quite often, all that's required is some information on proper animal husbandry, a warning on what could potentially happen if compliance isn't obtained, and that sort of thing. And that's usually pretty effective. Where we're laying these 21 charges is where suffering of the animal is severe or prolonged. So we're fairly effective in those, and last year I think it was about 1,300 calls, but we're pretty effective at ensuring that animals are treated humanely through that approach, along with the amplified prosecutions as well.
It sounds like people, for the most part, want to comply.
Yeah, I mean, the media will tend to sensationalize these big cases, like the one we've seen recently with the husky and the cat. But those ones are very rare, and the majority of what we're doing is dogs outside without adequate shelter, or dogs left in vehicles in hot weather, and those sorts of things. And usually you can get a pretty good outcome via a temporary seizure of an animal or through education.
So how many calls are for the hard abuse? As you mentioned, it was 1,300 calls. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
For actual witnessed abuse from neighbors and
that
bystanders.
includes abandonments, abuse, neglect of all sorts, abuse in general, and that can be anything from somebody smacking their dog and their neighbor reporting that to something as horrific as we've seen lately. We'll get a roughly 250, 300 of those every year.
That seems like a lot, though. I mean, we're
It's
talking
more than we need.
nearly one a day.
Yeah.
It's just it's staggering. You think if you're going to be owning a pet, you'd hope you'd have the best intent for that pet. Clearly, not always the case, though, is it, Catherine?
Yeah, unfortunately not, yeah.
So with 14 months being the longest sentence having been handed down within Alberta for animal abuse, and just, per personal opinion, if you would, federally the maximum currently is only 5 years, for animal abuse. It's a law that's existed, essentially, it's been the same since 1892. Your personal opinion, is 5 years nearly enough for some of the cruelty we've seen?
I'm probably not the best person to ask.
Well,
I would
just
say,
as an average citizen.
As an average citizen, I think, there should be harder measures, for sure. I don't know whether 5-year sentence in jail is the right approach. I think educating people about how to treat animals is probably the better way, I would think. Although, if it's extreme cruelty, yeah, why not?
Send a message.
Yeah.
Yourself, Brad, I imagine maybe not 5 years.
Yeah, I mean, the criminal code was amended back in, I think, 2008 or 2009, and it is up from 2 years as a maximum, so it has been improved.
Okay.
And I have to say, from my perspective, the laws that we have, both provincially and federally, aren't horrible. There are vehicles in there to accomplish, what we're after, but unfortunately, like you say, the longest incarceration being 14 months, even anything approaching the maximums aren't being used in court. So you can have any law you want, and you can say life imprisonment, whatever you want. But if the courts aren't getting that case precedent and aren't imposing these types of sentences, then the laws on the books have nothing to do with that whatsoever.
Is it a hard case to try?
It can. I mean, it's like any other crime. You have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, and that can be difficult in circumstantial cases. But it's the same burden of proof as it is for anything else. So we have a job as investigators to make sure we're putting together the most compelling case possible, and leaving it in the hands of capable prosecutors.
Citizens are generally pretty eager to help out, I would hope.
I mean, for the most part, at least in the big city here, generally an animal-loving society, and if we didn't get complaints from the public about what was going on, we wouldn't have anything to investigate.
That's right. So you encourage people to keep calling. Clearly.
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely. Switching gears a little bit here, as an animal lover myself, I mean, I still eat supermarket purchased, bacon and eggs, for example. Considering some of the inhumane conditions that some of those animals, arguably are raised in, am I a hypocrite? Is that an example for hypocrisy for me to, want to protect, like Ike had mentioned earlier with the Rant Pack, the speaker that we had, the cute pets are the ones that are getting a lot of the attention. What about these chickens, the pigs? I mean, is that hypocrisy?
I think to a large extent, again, I think it has a lot to do with education and knowing about the conditions. And there should certainly be laws that help, prevent those kind of conditions where you have, let's say, chickens in, cooped up and they can't even walk anymore, which unfortunately still happens. Yes, so to some degree, I would say it is hypocrisy. But you have a choice. You can select the type of chicken you want to eat, or whatever poultry you want to eat, or the eggs you want to eat. If you're informed and you know about these conditions, you can actually switch to more humane types of husbandry. So
there is options.
Organic, for example, free range. These things. So
and it does come with a price tag, though, which is no secret.
It does, yes. But then you don't have to eat meat every day. It's not really a requirement. So you can choose between, accepting that maybe these animals are not living in that good a condition, or saying, well, I really don't want to see that, and therefore, you choose an alternative, or, so.
Brad, would you agree?
I guess in the same sense that you're a hypocrite, I am as well. I mean, you do hope that the animals that are going for slaughter and being prepared for food are being treated humanely. I mean, it's not always going to be the case, but like you mentioned, you do have choices as far as, you know, what kind of eggs you're buying or what kind of meat you're buying. And, you know, if your morality is based on how the animals are treated, then, you know, buy the free run eggs. But